Hello, I'm Tony Horgan. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make 12 different kick drums or bass drums using the Korg Volca drum. I'll be showing you patches that I've created myself for my book, Korg Volca Drum, The Expert Guide, which is available in print from lulu.com and also as an ebook from Google Play Books and Apple Books. Here's a quick preview of the drums we're going to make, and then we'll get into them in more detail in a moment. This is an acoustic kick drum emulation. It's not the most effective of all of the kick drums that I'm going to show you here, but I think it's useful to start with this one so that we know kind of what we're trying to emulate in the first place, and then when we do our other kick drums, we know kind of where we're branching off from and what we're improving on. So the kick drum sounds like this. I can play it in a basic pattern for you to give you an idea of how it might sound. So because we're trying to emulate an acoustic kick drum, I've built this one to try to recreate two aspects of the sound of an acoustic kick drum, and I've used layer 1 and layer 2 to do each of those parts. So layer 1 is emulating the general kind of resonance of the shell of the drum. So when let's imagine here's a bass drum, and here's the beater that whacks it. When the beater whacks the shell of the bass drum, or whacks the microphone as I did just then, it causes some reverberations and resonance within the shell of the bass drum, and that's the main bass sound and the main bass frequency that we hear. There's also the sound of the beater actually impacting on the drum skin, which we try to emulate with layer 2. So layer 1 uses a sine wave, and it's at the maximum volume level of 255, and it has a low pitch setting of 20, and there's a little bit of pitch modulation happening there with the pitch mod amount of 42 and the rate of 188. So that causes that pitch modulation at the start of that sine wave means that instead of just having a sine wave like this, we have a sine wave that starts at a higher frequency and then settles down to this lower frequency. So that gives us a bit of detail at the start of the wave, which goes some way to simulating that impact of the beater on the drum skin. However, we need a bit more to simulate that a bit more realistically, so we're using layer 2 with a noise wave. So this is the noise wave here that we're using for layer 2. It's a band pass filtered noise wave. And that's at a low volume level here, a volume level of 18, just to balance it up. Otherwise it would be too loud. So it sounds like this, to remind you again. And if we were to put it into a pattern again, it would sound like this. I've just made up, very quickly made up a kind of a hi-hat and a snare just on the fly. So I don't have those patches because I just made them up. But it can sound like this. So from this bass drum, we're going to move on to sounds that are less realistic but can be more effective and have a bit more punch in them. So let's move on. I call this one A1 kick for two reasons. First of all, because it's tuned to the note A1, and second, because it's my go-to kick. So if I was to list it alphabetically with all my other kicks, it would be at the top of the list and easy for me to find. The reason I say it's my favourite and my go-to kick drum is because it has nice low frequencies, but it also has some high frequency detail that helps it to stand out on smaller systems like maybe phones or laptop speakers, which can be important if you want your music to come across on lots of different types of devices. So let's have a quick look at how it looks and how it sounds. So this is how it's made up and this is how it sounds. You can see that it's using two sine waves, one for each layer, and they're both tuned to the note A1. And the main difference between the two sine waves is the modulation settings. So the pitch modulation settings there. So layer 1 has the amount of 39 and a rate of 144, and layer 2 has an amount of 60 and a rate of 130. This has the effect of creating some detail at the front of the wave, like we did with the acoustic kick drum. So that's the bit that you hear on smaller speakers, because the waveform, or both of those waveforms, start at higher frequencies and then they settle down to that main lower frequency of A1. So this is how it sounds, and I'll just play you a quick bass line for some context as well. I call this one A1 kick long because it's exactly the same as the A1 kick that we had just now, but it's longer and it sounds like this. And the A1 kick, the original, sounds like this. So that's the short one and this is the long one. So here it is in a pattern. You can see here that the release time of the layer 1 wave is at the maximum setting of 255. So that means the layer 1 wave takes quite a long time to fade out. We can compare that to the previous A1 kick sound, which is this one. This has a release time of 147 on layer 1, and then the A1 kick long with that much longer 255 setting. So you could tune that to a different note, of course. You could use any tuning that you like that fits your music, but I've just chosen A1. Also, you could put those together into the same loop if you wanted to, and if you use the choke feature, then you can stop those long and short versions overlapping. So in this kit, for example, in this kit I've got the short one and the long one here, and they're both set to have the choke feature enabled. So when one plays, if the other plays, it will stop that one. So if I play the long one and then the short one will stop the long one. So you could add that to the pattern. And that's your A1 kick long. This one is called chip kick. I call it chip kick because it's reminiscent of what we now call chip tunes, the chip tunes style of music, which is used to describe a kind of style that's reminiscent of the 8-bit era of computers and video games. So in those days, the sound chips were generally fairly basic and the waveforms were quite harsh and steppy. So this is how it sounds in a pattern, and then I'll show you how it's made up. You can see here that it actually only uses one layer to make the sound. Layer 2 has a level setting of 0. The level setting is the volume level of that layer. So because that's at 0, all of the other layer 2 settings are irrelevant. So I haven't put any figures in for those. Coming over to layer 1, this is making the sound, first of all, with a sawtooth wave. So rather than the sine wave that we've used before, we're using a sawtooth wave. So already that's quite a harsh sound. And then we're making it even harder using the bit, fold and drive effects. The bit effect is a bit reduction effect. So instead of having a wave that goes like this, if it's a sine wave, or like this, if it's a sawtooth wave, it changes that into lots of steps like this, like you might get with a very low bit rate or bit depth sound chip, such as you might get on a Commodore 64, for example. When you add all of these effects, the volume of the sound can increase. So even though on here I have actually specified a gain setting of 0, in this loop I've reduced the gain setting to about -50. When you reduce the gain setting, it allows you to take the overall volume of the sound down without having to go back and change all of the other things that affect the overall volume sound. So you can get the sound that you want, and then you can turn the volume up or down accordingly to match what else you've got in the pattern. So here it is in the pattern, and I'll play something else along with it, and then we'll move on. This one is called Tight Kick Short. We have a longer version of it coming up in a moment. That's why this is the short one. And I think it's got quite a kind of tight sound to it. See what you think. It's based on the A1 kick that we made earlier, but it has a slightly different amount and rate setting for each layer, and that gives it a bit more punch, a little bit more bite, perhaps, and makes it sound a little bit harder. See what you think. This is a longer version of the tight kick that we just played. So the only difference between this and the other one is that the layer 2 release setting is longer. So the layer 2 release setting here is on 255, which is the maximum amount. It sounds like this. This one's really good fun. It's called Techno Double Kick. It uses 2 layers to create 2 kind of parts to the sound. So you've got the first kick, and then you've got this sort of almost like an echo that comes after it. So if we take a look at the visual, you'll see we do that using a fairly standard kind of sine wave and modulation, pitch modulation amount for both waves. But the way that we get the 2 different phases is to use different attack and release settings for each layer. So layer 1 creates the first boom. That's got an attack setting of 0 and a release setting of 45. So that comes on straight away as soon as the sound is triggered. And then layer 2 has the attack setting of 147 and a release of 70. So as the first part of the sound fades down, the second part of the sound fades up. So you've got one sine wave that comes up and then fades away, and then you've got another one that comes up. So it's like boom, boom, like this, boom, boom. And then you can change the release, the attack and release settings of layer 2 to change the timing of when that comes back in, when that comes in. So it sounds like this. I've put a kind of a hi-hat type thing on it somewhere. Let's find that. And then you could do something nice and techno-y over it. I've got something here on the monologue. I call this one retro rhythm kick because it's based on the kind of bass drums that you would get in older rhythm machines before things were called drum machines, when they were called things like rhythm computers. What should we do? Let's have a little waltz and then we'll move on to the next sound. This one is called Urban Underground Kick. It's a very strong, distinctive kick drum. It has quite a long release time. So it's not necessarily something you're going to use bang, 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 bang. It's more something you're going to use at the start of a bar, and then maybe maybe just at the start of a bar, or maybe once or twice after that at different places. A bit like this. It's quite a harsh sound, as you can tell there. Let's have a look at how we achieve that. It's not actually tuned really specifically to notes using the QPI feature. So QPI is off here, but you could tune it to specific notes if you want to. It uses two quite differently tuned layers. Layer 1 is creating the bass with that low pitch setting of 16, and layer 2 is creating more of the high frequency kind of detail. And they both have quite a high amount of pitch modulation. Well, quite a high rate of pitch modulation anyway. So here 32 and 126, and here quite a high amount and rate of pitch modulation. That, along with the fold and drive, that gives it a bit more character, and it means the waveform is moving around a lot more than just a pure sine wave that's just going like this. So that creates more harmonics, especially when those two waves are combined and they kind of interact, moving at their different frequencies. So what else can I tell you about this one? It uses that linear type of EG envelope that I spoke about before when we were talking about the retro rhythm kick. So both of them use that one. So that's one way that we get that very long sustained sound. So it still has a fade at the end, but it does have quite a big, bold, big, fat, chunky, loud part of the sound. Okay, I'll just play this in a few patterns, and we'll move on to the next one. This is another favourite of mine. It's called Soft Deep Kick. It sounds like this. In case you can't hear anything on your system that you're listening on at the moment, listen on headphones or a bigger system, because this sound has very little in the high frequency range, and it's nearly all in very low, muted, muffled kind of bass frequencies. It actually plays two different notes. It's tuned to G1 and D1. So when I just play this once, so I tell you what, if you can see here, when I press the key once, you get a kind of a double hit. You get you're actually getting two notes there. So you're going to get two notes because one of the layers fades up first and then the other layer takes over. So it's kind of like boom, boom, like this. Boom, boom. And the notes it's tuned to are G1 and D1. The way we get it to fade up at different rates is to use different attack and release settings, but more specifically different attack settings for each of the layers. So that those attack settings there of 70 and 156 mean that the layer 1 with the attack of 70 comes up here, but layer 2 with 156 doesn't come up until about here, by which time this one's coming down. So we have these waves that are coming, they're both starting at the same time, but one of them comes up and then the other one comes up like this. And because they're tuned to different notes, you get a kind of a boom, 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 boom kind of effect. That can allow you to, there it is again, I'll just play it while I talk. That can allow you to have a bit more freedom with the bass line, because there's a lot of bass action going on there. So what you can do is either maybe not even have a bass line at all, because that is actually possible to do in some tracks, not even actually have a bass line. Or you can have a kind of a faux bass line where you're playing something that kind of sounds like a bass line, but it's actually up in a higher register nearer the kind of mid-range frequencies that will come through on a smaller system and have a bit more bite and be a bit more hummable, really. So this one sounds quite nice with quite a minimal kind of backing, like this. This one is a heartbeat kind of sound, so it's not exactly a kick, but it's kind of related to the kick sort of sounds we've been making. As with the previous sound, if you can't hear anything right now, then listen on headphones or on a bigger system, because it's very, very bassy and muffled. So this sound is similar to the soft deep kick that we looked at just now, although this one is tuned, both layers are tuned to the same note here, G1, but it uses the same idea of having these different attack and release settings, which are quite long for both layers. So once again, that means you have the sound coming up and down and then up and down within the same sound. So if I just play it once, you get two hits again. And then if I play it in a pattern, it's just being triggered here. Finally, for this video, we have one called Hardcore Warehouse Kick. It sounds like this. We're continuing with that idea of having two different waves, one fading up and then another fading up after that, like we did with the soft deep kick and the heartbeat. In this one, the main drum beat, the main kick is layer 1, and then we have a kind of a fake or a simulated reverb effect from layer 2. Layer 2 uses a low pass filtered noise wave here. so this thing at the top right, that denotes the little gap to the left of that wave denotes the bit of noise that's going to come through the filter, so that lower frequencies are going to come through the filter from the left. The pitch of that is set very low as well at F0. And because we have an attack setting of 150 on layer 2, then that means that the sound of that fades up after the main sound. We could make that a little bit more prominent by increasing the level 2, the layer 2 level, so the volume of layer 2. Or if we take it all the way down, we won't hear it at all. So now we can just hear layer 1, which is a good solid drum beat, good solid kick drum. And then as we fade up the level of layer 2, we'll start to hear that low pass filtered noise. So I've normally got this set to about 150. And this is good for nice strong pounding kind of techno and hard trance, that kind of thing. So let's try it in that sort of pattern.